As the early days of the new millennium rolled along, the cable network VH1 found itself at a crossroads. In the 90s, their sister station MTV had already begun shifting away their programming from its music-based origins. Hoping to distinguish themselves from MTV, VH1 took the opposite approach and doubled down on music. They emphasized that their shows would focus on the music first and launched a series of successful franchises like Storytellers, Pop-Up Video, and of course, Behind the Music. VH1 had carved a niche in the world of cable television, but they were beginning to feel that they were becoming stagnant. Creatively speaking, they had hit a wall. They were having trouble launching new shows, and people were getting critical of all the Behind the Music reruns. The show was great, but there's only so many times you can hear Nikki Sixx talk about dying before you want to watch something else. Not helping VH1's midlife crisis was a dissatisfaction with the age of their demographic. Their viewers skewed a bit older, and VH1 wanted to pivot the network away from baby boomers to Gen X. They were looking for a way to rebrand their network, and so they did what all networks seem to do in this situation. They launched the talk show. For reasons I don't fully comprehend, talk shows are a go-to move for networks looking for a new identity. Many a network have tried and failed to launch a new talk show with the hopes of finding a new audience. Hell, this wasn't even VH1's first crack at a talk show. In the mid-90s, they gave RuPaul a chat show on their network. What would make this one different would be the host, a young unknown comedian named Zach Galifianakis. Before Baskets, or The Hangover, or Due Date, or The Hangover 3, Zach Galifianakis was a working comedian. He had booked a few minor parts as an actor on shows like Boston Common, but he was most known for his role in the 90s alternative comedy scene. With his trademark bushy beard and piano, Zach's stand-up was unique but hilarious. He was one of those comedians that other comedians adored. Amongst those comedic admirers was Janeane Garofalo. Garofalo was guest hosting for David Letterman and used that opportunity to help out her friend Zach and book him for his very first late-night talk show appearance. The gig was Zach's big break, and it got him a lot of attention. Safe to say that without that appearance, he might not have gotten a role in the biggest comedy film of the 2000s, Out Cold. Okay, so I may have overestimated how big Out Cold was. It's still pretty great. Zach's real big break came when VH1 decided he would be the perfect pick to host their new late-night show. When it was announced that Late World with Zach would premiere on VH1 in March of 2002, it was a surprise to everyone, including Zach. He would later say he took the job without even really thinking about what it meant for his career. VH1 explained the decision by telling outlets that they wanted to find their own unknown comedian, just like how NBC found Conan O'Brien. Zach says he thinks he only got the job because he played the piano, and VH1 thought that would still fit their brand as a music network. Comedian Greg Fitzsimmons thinks otherwise. In an interview with Galifianakis for his podcast Fitzdog Radio, Fitzsimmons talked about a pilot Zach and Greg did called Time Capsule 2000. While the show didn't get picked up, Fitzsimmons remembers Zach leaving an impression on the VH1 executives. VH1 really wanted their new youth-based rebranding to work and put a lot of focus on promoting their new programming. Late Night would air 4 nights a week along with another new show, Nevermind the Buzzcocks. Buzzcocks was hosted by another relatively unknown comedian named Mark Maron, but that's for a whole other episode. There was a lot of talk in the press about what the show would be. Zach would describe his idea as an anti-talk show, one that would make fun of Hollywood. He was hoping to create something that fit his sensibilities. To help guide his vision, he hired future Metalocalypse creator Tommy Blancha as his head writer. Zach had all sorts of ideas for a show, including his dream of a trapdoor under his guests that would open up if they got too boring. And so on March 4th, 2002, Late World with Zach made his premiere on VH1 with his first guests, the Foo Fighters.
Oh, hi. Oh.
How's it going?
Yeah, things were going well.
You're doing okay?
Yeah, I'm doing okay.
First show?
First show?
Jitters?
Little jittery, yes.
Little butterfly?
Little butterfly.
Yeah?
While the show was hyped as an anti-talk show, the first episodes are pretty standard. There were random non-sequiturs and bizarre moments thrown in there, but most episodes quickly fell into the usual talk show tropes. Zach would do a monologue at the piano and make jokes about current events. They'd cut to a pre-recorded sketch or two, and then do a celebrity interview followed by a musical performance. Musicians that appeared on the show included Vanessa Carlton, Natalie Imbruglia, Five for Fighting, and think about anyone who was on VH1 in 2002 when they probably did the show. Quite frankly, the first episodes of the show are rough. Zach appeared very uncomfortable on camera, as if even he was confused that he had a talk show on VH1. He also admitted he was high pretty much all the time, so that might have something to do with it. In later years, Zach made it clear just how much he hated doing the interviews. They are definitely the hardest parts of the show to watch. He's trying his best to appear enthusiastic, but it's weird seeing him try to keep the energy up while interviewing a young Rashida Jones about what it's like being the 5th female lead on Boston Public. Don't get me wrong, there were good parts of the show, especially in the pre-recorded segments. One of the best recurring bits was fake red carpet interviews. They'd splice in red carpet interviews with celebrities that had Zach asking questions from an alley obviously nowhere near the event. I really only brought it up so I could play my favorite one.
Denzel Washington. Can you talk to a bush for me?
You get other little moments like pretending a clip from Friday the 13th is from Wayne Brady's newest film, but stuff like that was few and far between. If you looked hard enough you could find Zach's voice in the show, but it almost felt like they had to sneak it in. The show felt like a compromise because in many ways it was. VH1 didn't meddle too much with the day-to-day production, but they still had strict rules they expected Zach to follow. They had a list backstage of all the artists they weren't allowed to make fun of, like Creed, or Celine Dion, or Cher. Basically, if you were in heavy rotation at VH1, you were considered untouchable. It's why you've never heard a good eagle-eyed cherry joke. Zach was disappointed. He wanted to do a talk show like David Letterman, but instead he's doing a roundtable discussion with the cast of Sorority Boys. While Zach was having a hard time figuring out what his talk show persona would be, VH1 was having a harder time with the ratings. They were awful. The first 3 weeks of the show were averaging only 129,000 viewers a night. Zach began making jokes on air about how nobody knew him, which peaked when he stood in line with his own audience before the show and nobody recognized him.
Oh, it's with that Zach guy. I've seen it. I wouldn't stand in this line. That guy's terrible.
In an effort to right the ship, they hired former David Letterman producer Robert Morton to try and fix the show. Morton came in and promptly fell in love with it. He thought the show reminded him of young Letterman and didn't think the show needed fixing. It just needed time. With the pressure mounting and the show circling the drain, the crew at Late World began to realize they were probably going to get canceled. It is at that point they said, F it. And that's when it got funny. As the show marched closer and closer to its inevitable demise, it got closer and closer to what the initial vision for Late World with Zach was. It truly became the anti-talk show. Instead of doing a monologue in a studio, Zach brought his monologues to daycares, old folks' homes, and city buses.
Robert De Niro is producing a musical about Queen. It's called Are You Talking to Me? Fat Bottom Girls, Are You Talking to Me?
One show opened with an empty piano before revealing that Zach called in sick that day and instead would be doing the show from his house. The whole episode took place there, complete with an interview with Ricky Lake while doing dishes.
I think our audiences are similar. Well, I don't want to speak for your audience. Mine's really, really dumb.
He began putting red carpets at random locations and interviewing strangers as if they were celebrities. He'd do things like bail on a monologue one joke in and instead do an interpretive dance to Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie. He'd randomly shave his beard in the middle of an episode for no discernible reason other than he could. There was a whole episode with my new favorite recurring character, Sneaky Jesus. In his favorite episode, Zach did a completely by-the-book episode of the show, save for the fact that there was only one disinterested audience member who didn't even stay for the whole taping. He still had to do celebrity interviews, but he did them more and more on his terms. For example, a George Lopez interview was hijacked by VH1's quote-unquote new consultant for the show, Fred Willard.
That's good jokes here.
That's good jokes, yeah.
Don't let him sit here like that. He's a major talent. He's got a series.
Yes, sir, I
Ask him some
apologize.
questions.
I apologize.
How were you discovered?
Speaking of VH1, Zach finally began the time-honored tradition of talk show hosts making fun of their own network. He lambasted the ratings, the guests, and especially the musicians. Surprisingly, VH1 liked when Zach mocked them, which allows me to make this fun little montage of him ripping them apart.
Bono testified yesterday at the air rage trial of REM guitarist Peter Buck. It's not really a joke there, but this is VH1. I just have to say crap like that. How many of you have seen my television show? You're the demographic that VH1 is looking for. VH1 sucks! VH1 sucks! All right. Why don't they cancel Behind the Music, you know? I mean, that thing's been on too long. Behind the Music is the same old story behind the music. This show should be called Drugs, Car Crash, Fat.
While the new, more unhinged version of Late World with Zach gained some buzz, it was too little too late. At the end of April, Zach announced that the show was canceled. Then the crowd cheered and confetti dropped. The show would air as a lame duck for the rest of that week, but all the logos would be plastered over with the word canceled. The day he announced the show's demise was also the same day his guests were the band Poison, which I think just sums up the disconnect between VH1 and Zach Galifianakis right there. One of his final guests may have been his most infamous, as his future Hangover co-star and a man so desperate for an Academy Award it hurts me, Bradley Cooper, appeared on the show. One of the best examples of Zach's anti-talk show philosophy, their mundane conversation is constantly interrupted by voiceovers of their inner monologues talking about how poorly the interview is going.
And crazy stuff.
Well, it's good if someone farted.
A fart joke? You know, somehow I'm not surprised.
That was a great fart joke.
The final episode aired on May 2nd, 2002, as Zach came out to the theme from The Incredible Hulk and without his piano. David Koechner played a man hired by VH1 as a one-man laugh track who screamed and laughed throughout the entire episode at inopportune times. The show got dangerously close to sincerity, but always pulled out at the last second. After thanking the most important person involved in the show, himself, Zach sat on his piano and left America with his final words.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to get through this thing called life. Electric word, life, it means forever, and that's a mighty long time. But I'm here to tell you, there's something else. The afterworld. A world of never-ending happiness. You can always see the sun, day or night. So when you call up that shrink in Beverly Hills, you know the one, Doctor, everything will be all right. You know what I'm just trying to say? Let's go crazy. Let's get down. That's it.
Zach walked out of the studio and into a dumpster, and Late World was over. Its entire run was less than 2 months. The show has become a cult classic. Much has been written about its brilliance and how it was canceled too soon, but I don't agree. An article of Zach in GQ magazine said of Late World that it didn't get funny until it was going to get killed, and boy was that right. The show only became great when it was clear it had no chance of survival. It wasn't a show that was killed too soon. It's a show where Lucky lived for as long as it did. After the show, Zach went back to his stand-up career. He downplayed the effect the cancellation had on him, but his friend Patton Oswalt would later tell GQ magazine that he thinks the cancellation f***ed up Zach for a decade. Zach's career eventually recovered so greatly that I think most people aren't even aware he hosted a talk show on VH1. Zach did get a second chance at a talk show when he launched Between Two Ferns. That show is much more representative of Zach's sense of humor. Strangely enough, during my research, I found that the seeds for Between Two Ferns seemed to be planted even way back during the Late World days. When people would ask Zach about his idea for a talk show, he'd mention he wanted a stark, almost Charlie Rose-esque dark background. He'd want no studio audience. And of course, he'd want no celebrity guests. Well, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting the like button. If you want to see more of my videos, maybe consider hitting subscribe. And if you want to do either one of those things, that's fine, but you should probably keep watching for the next couple seconds, because this is primo sneaky Jesus content.